Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a sheath for a bookworm, or a book snake as some people call them. You'll need an organic fabric that's either 100% cotton, linen, or muslin for this. You'll also need a weighted material such as a rope or a chain. You'll be using the fabric to make a sheath for the weighted material. You will also need a ruler or a tape measure, scissors, a fabric pencil or marker, pins, and access to a sewing machine or needles to hand sew the sheath. In the videos and photographs, I use a white thread on a black fabric for high contrast, that way it's easier to see what I'm doing. When sewing a sheath to use for imaging, I recommend using a thread that's the same color as your fabric. I'm going to explain my process for creating the sheath. The sped up video in the upper left shows the entire process, while the images on the right will show each step as I talk about them. To start, I lay out my fabric on a large surface, and I place the weighted material by the cut edge of the fabric. I'm going to roll the edge of the fabric over the weighted material and leave about a 1/4 inch of extra space at the bottom. That space will be for my seam allowance while I'm sewing. I'm putting a pin where the folded edge of the fabric ends. I'm going to take my ruler and measure from the pin to the edge of the fabric. I'm going to refer to this measurement as the width. This will be the width of the fabric once I've cut it. Using that measurement that I just took, in my video, it was 3 inches for the rope. Using the chain, it was 4 inches. I'm going to begin measuring that length from the top of the fabric in several places along the length of the entire fabric. I'm going to put a mark each time I measure it. I'm going to use those marks that I made to draw a straight line across the fabric. You take measurements in multiple places because the fabric isn't always cut evenly. This is going to help you in the future, that way your fabric is more symmetrical. When I'm done, the line's going to be my reference for cutting the fabric. As a quick side note here, if your fabric is much longer than you need it, you can also trim the length of the fabric to better suit your needs. I did not do that for this demonstration. Once the fabric has been cut, go ahead and fold it in half, like seen in the photo here. Start placing pins along the entire length of the fabric. The placement of pins in terms of their distance and how many is fully up to you. If you're less comfortable with sewing, place more pins closer together. That way your fabric is less likely to move. With the preparations for the fabric done, I'm going to go ahead and start sewing. I've already threaded my bobbin and my needle. If you haven't done that, be sure to pause the video now and take a moment to do so. In the video, you can see that I'm taking care to line up the edge of the fabric underneath the foot of the sewing machine. I'm trying to make it so that the needle will enter right at the edge of the fabric. After I've positioned my fabric, I turn on the machine, lower the foot, and start sewing. I make about 3 stitches into the fabric before I reverse the stitch. I'm going to go back 3 stitches and then continue to sew forward from there. I go back and continue to sew to make sure that my stitches and my thread are secured in the fabric. This helps to keep the thread from pulling out of the fabric while you're using your sheath. You can see that as I'm going, I'm removing the pins and making sure that my needle doesn't run over the pins while I'm sewing. I'm also making sure to keep my seam allowance straight, and you'll see me occasionally pause and just make sure that everything is okay. I'm going to sew the entire length of the fabric, taking care to remove the pins as I go. When I'm at the end, I make sure to secure my stitches again before lifting the foot and cutting the thread. I'm also going to take a second to pause here and trim the ends of the thread with my scissors. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that process I just did on one of the short ends of the fabric. Make sure to secure your stitches as you're doing this and trim any leftover edges of thread after you're done sewing. Now that you've finished sewing, go ahead and start to turn your fabric. Currently, the fabric is inside out. You're going to want to turn it right side out so that you can hide the stitches you made. This process can take a bit of time. There are some tools you can use to make the process go easier and faster. You should be able to find those at a local crafting store. I use my fingers and a pin since I don't have any of those tools. Skinnier sheaths can take a lot longer to turn right side out. Feel free to pop on a show or a podcast as you're doing that. Take a second to pause the video and turn your sheath right side out. Now that you have your sheath turned, you're going to go ahead and feed your weighted material into the sheath. I found the easiest way to do this is to hold the sheath open and let gravity do the work for you. You can also feed the material through the sheath by hand if you'd like. After your material is in the sheath, go ahead and close the end. If you don't plan on removing the material from the sheath, go ahead and sew it closed like you did above. You can also tie the opening closed with a string. I'd recommend doing that if you're looking to remove the weighted material inside. Afterwards, you have a sheath that you'll be able to use for imaging.